G'day, Daniel here from Living Entertainment. Now, one of the most popular series of speakers that we've ever covered on this channel was the Wharfedale Evo 4 range. They looked more expensive than they were, they had a fantastic airy sound to them, and the bass reflex port design allowed them to be placed in a lot of rooms and situations that not all speakers were really well suited for, which gave them a great deal of flexibility. But now Wharfedale have brought the Evo 5 series to the table, and that begs the question, what's changed? Today I am mostly going to be focusing on the Evo 5.2, but that said, everything I say about this particular stand mount speaker is entirely applicable to the rest of the range as well. At first glance, the Evo 5 range hasn't changed that much from the Evo 4 series. Now to me, that is fine because, as I mentioned, the Evo 4 range was already an incredibly premium looking series. Although, one thing that has got me off guard is the new addition of a grey model. Initially, when I saw the photos of this particular color, I wasn't entirely sold on it. But now having seen the Evo 5.4 in this particular color, I've completely done a 180. I think it looks absolutely slick, and look, honestly, I might actually prefer it to the walnut. It has a real like apple space gray sort of finish to it, and yeah, it looks really, really cool. And I haven't seen the white and the black models yet, but I'm hoping that their finish is similar. Another small change for the Evo 5.2s and the rest of the range is actually the shape of the grills with the original Evo 4 series that were kind of like just a straight vertical rectangle. But now with these newer models, we have a nice little curve at the bottom of the grill, and I think it's really cohesive with the actual tapered back of the speaker. It kind of follows that same design language. So that's a really minor thing that I think is pretty cool and actually adds to the overall aesthetic in a subtle but nice way. Now with the bookshelf model specifically, these aren't something that you can get a generic stand for like you can with most box-shaped speakers. Because of the tapered back and unique shape of these particular speakers, you really do need to get Wharfedale's custom specific stands for these speakers. To some people that might be a bit of an issue, but I personally, given the, again, unique shape of the speaker and the unique weight distribution because of that, I think it does make sense to pay that little extra to get those proper stands, which isn't something that I would generally say for most standard bookshelf speakers. So if we can't really tell what's changed just by looking at the speaker, I guess we're going to have to dig a little bit deeper. So the Evo 5.2 is still a three-way bookshelf design, and it is still using that same bass reflex system that made the Evo 4 so flexible previously. But it's the introduction of the trickle-down technology from Wharfedale's Elysium series that really kind of changes the game here. The previous 30 to 60 millimeter AMT tweeter has been upgraded to a 35 by 70 AMT tweeter. And this jump in size allows for greater speed and accuracy. The new 2-inch soft dome mid-range driver implements RisoSeal elastomer technology, and this goes a long way to continuing Wharfedale's legacy of having speakers with fantastically rich and lush mid-range performance. And despite the new black woven Kevlar cone bass driver shrinking from 6.5 inches on the 4.2 to just 6 inches on the 5.2, its bass performance has been improved substantially from 48 Hz down to 38 Hz. And believe me, you can feel that difference. Lastly, there's the inclusion of innovative technology such as the Silent Weave absorber and the RisoFrame driver supports. And these come together to minimize internal reflections and cabinet resonances. When you bring all of these things together, you end up with a speaker that's jumped from a frequency response of 54 Hz to 28 kHz to 38 hertz to 24 kilohertz, all while retaining an incredibly flexible power recommendation of 25 watts to 120 watts. And speaking of those power recommendations, I tried these speakers on a number of amplifiers, all the way down to the Project Speakerbox S3, and had fantastic results. But the two amplifiers I want to focus on today are the new Audiolab 6000A Mark II and the Ruark R610 Music Console. These are two very, very different amplifiers trying to achieve very different goals in very different ways. But in terms of pricing, they are perfect pairings. The first thing I want to talk about is the bass performance, because it's kind of what really stood out to me most. Now, I don't know how much of this is because of my room, but these speakers sound huge. Like floor standard size huge. The bass was fast, the bass was tight, and it was big. This was best highlighted by Mac Miller's Friendly Hallucinations. There was a lot of bamf, there was a lot of boom, but there was no bloat, there was no lumpiness. I will say the Audiolab kind of eked ahead in this particular respect, not so much because it had a larger bass impact, but just that initial punch was just that little bit more, feeling it in your chest. But honestly, regardless of which of the two amplifiers you go with, you're getting a fantastic bass response. When it comes to the treble, there was a real sweetness to its presentation, and I think that was best highlighted by Joel McNeely's Beggar Canyon Chase from the Shadows of the Empire soundtrack. There are so many large brass sections in that particular track, and yeah, regardless of how high those got, there was just a real smooth, sweet sort of sound to it. And regardless of what I was listening to, there was never any harshness, there's no brittleness, there's no sheen up there. It's just a very, very clean, relatively transparent presentation. I will say, however, that the airiness from the Evo 4.2 wasn't quite as pronounced. I guess you could say things felt a little bit more full and a little bit more filled out. Not in a this sounds big kind of way, but just in a, I guess you could say there's a little bit more bleed between the instruments. But we're talking about Wharfedale, so of course we have to talk about that mid-range performance. And unsurprisingly, this is where the Evo 5.2 really, shows off its stuff. Listening to Bonnie Prince Billy's London May, the vocals really do pop out of the mix, giving a bit of dimensionality there. This is not a flat sounding speaker at all. There is a ton of texture and timbre to the vocals. Things like guitars sound incredibly rich. They sound very organic. It's just an overall really enjoyable, I'm not going to say it shouts at you with detail in the mid-range, but there is definitely a kind of matter-of-factness to its presentation, which I think is super easy to appreciate. However, this is also where the biggest difference was in the performance between the Ruark and the Audiolab. I will say the amount of texture in the Ruark's performance was substantially less than it was in the Audiolab. And the easiest place to hear that in this Bonnie Prince Billy track was actually in the drums. There is a lot of little details there that are very, very pronounced on the Audiolab that are just kind of, I guess, smoothed over to the point on the Ruark where they're kind of not all that noticeable. There was also a degree of energy to the Audiolab's performance that wasn't really there with the Ruark. And when it comes to all three of these tracks, there are some other things that are worth noting. I will definitely say that the dynamics on the Ruark are also a little weaker than they are on the Audiolab. The Audiolab definitely had stronger swings, and I think that leads to a more engaging and impactful listen personally. The Ruark is definitely more on the bit more of the laid-back presentation side of things, at least with these particular speakers. But on the flip side, in the Ruark's favor, there is a lot more decay to elements like vocals, like guitars, with the Ruark than there is on the Audiolab. And also I'd say the imaging is a smidge stronger on the Ruark as well. Not by much, it's really small, but it is there if you are listening for it. And I will say the Ruark, when it came to more complicated sections of tracks, it did do a slightly better job of pulling those elements apart and presenting them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that made the tracks more enjoyable than on the Audio Lab. It was just kind of one of those subtle things where there was that slightly more space, between everything on the Ruach, which that separation, while it was great in terms of technical listening, if you're not someone who wants to pull your music apart and think about it while you're listening, the Audio Lab's kind of better in that respect. It keeps things just that little bit more cohesive. It holds them together a little bit more. So while there are a lot of similarities running the Wharfedales through these two different amplifiers, certainly enough to give me an idea of the overall sound signature of these particular speakers, they are offering two very, very different flavors. And that's before you start taking into account all of the functions and features that are found in the Ruach that aren't in the Audio Lab. I absolutely love the Wharfedale Evo 5.2. I think they're more than an appropriate successor to the Evo 4.2, and I'm really excited to get the opportunity to listen to the Evo 5.4 in person, because based on the bass performance of the little Evo 5.2, I can't wait to hear just how big and impactful the 5.4 sounds, so I'm really excited for that. If you have any questions about the Evo 5.2, 5.4, either of the amplifiers talked about today, give us a call. You can find our details in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.